going on with the injunction you filed against the SBA?
Well, we're going to find out here in about 2 weeks. They've got about 2 weeks to respond. And my lawyer is very stoic, I guess you'll say. And the day after he filed it, I called him, and he said, this is a solid case. He says, his exact words were, they have no defense. And I talked to him on Friday. He thinks they might even, capitulate, because I can't imagine what they're going to say. They're giving small business contracts to Fortune 500 firms and their subsidiaries. And the Small Business Act is very clear and defining a small business as being independently owned, which would exclude publicly traded companies. And there's no small business size standard over 1,500 employees. And the Small Business Act is very clear that says in determining a company's status as a small business, you must include the number of employees of any parent companies or subsidiaries. So I can't imagine what they're going to do there. The Small Business Act also very clearly says that small business shall receive a minimum of 23% of the total value of all prime contracts awarded each year. So I can't imagine how they're going to explain to a judge that they're, using an acquisition budget number that I think is about a third of the real acquisition budget number to calculate those percentages. But I think their strategy is going to be to try to have it thrown out. So I'm predicting that they're going to try to have it thrown out. So they've got about another 10 days to respond. Today's June 1st. We filed it, I think, May 3rd. And I predict that they're going to do everything they can to get it thrown out, because just to respond to it, they're going to have to admit for the first time in 25 years that we're giving small business contracts to Fortune 500 firms. And that's going to be, to me, that's going to be a win to have them have to say that. And then they're going to have to admit and say, here's why we're using an acquisition budget that's dramatically less than what the real acquisition budget is. And, there's just no language in the Small Business Act to support what they're doing. And so I think their strategy is going to be to try to have it thrown out so they don't have to respond to it. And I hope that the court doesn't, go for that. But I won't be shocked if they do. I've been shocked in the past at some of the, rulings in some of the lawsuits I've filed. And but this will be devastating for the SBA and, quite frankly, for the entire federal government, the Pentagon. This will be devastating. So I'm prepared for some really radical, response to it. One funny thing that happened is Federal News Radio wrote a story about it the day after we filed it, and John Shakora, SBA's Associate Administrator for Government Contracting and Business Development, told Federal News Radio that SBA's exclusion practice is a continuation of previous administration rules. So they're trying to blame it on the Bush administration and being updated to be more inclusive. So now they're admitting, that they're changing. But here's the part that I find hilarious. This is what John Shakora said on May 4th to Federal News Radio. When we came in as an administration in 2009, we wanted to be able to continue to measure apples to apples to apples to see if we were actually making progress, Shakora said. We kept those exclusions as they stood when we arrived to make sure we weren't accused of sort of fiddling with the numbers and making it look like we were having success. That's hilarious. Basically what he's saying is, well, the president said it's time to end the diversion of federal small business contracts to corporate giants. That guy, that he kept the Bush administration policies in place. What was Obama's motto? A change we can believe in. So that's kind of silly. But he says we kept the exclusions as they stood when we arrived to make sure we weren't accused of sort of fiddling with the numbers and making it look like we were having success. But that's a complete opposite. You keep those exclusions in there, the exclusions, to inflate the number and make it look like you're doing better than you are. So his statement here is, incongruous, I'll say politely. but it's also a stupid thing to say, you know. When we came in as administration in 2009, we wanted to be able to continue to measure apples to apples to apples to see if we were actually making progress. We kept those exclusions as they stood when we arrived to make sure we weren't accused of sort of fiddling with the numbers and making it look like we were having success. And of course, gosh, since the Obama administration took over, every year, the SBA Inspector General has named the diversion of federal small business contracts to large business as the number one problem. The Inspector General that President Obama appointed. In 2009, the GAO issued Report 10108 that said, by failing to hold firms accountable, the SBA and contracting agencies have sent a message to the contracting community that there's no punishment or consequences for committing fraud in the disabled veteran-owned program. So a whole series of federal investigations, and gosh, there's been a number of stories in the mainstream media that have challenged the Obama administration numbers. So this is probably the stupidest thing this guy could have said, and I'm really glad that he said that, because I hope we get to depose him in the lawsuit and have him explain that ridiculous statement to us. So we'll see. But I hope that it's not thrown out, that they have to respond to it, because when they respond to it, they've lost. They have to admit for the first time that they're doing it. And if they do respond, I think we'll win, because the law is very clear. This isn't some gray area that needs to be interpreted by the court. It's perfectly clear. The language is, irrefutable. The small business get a minimum of 23% of the total value of all prime contract awards each year. And I'm not sure how the SBA is going to try to get around that with a judge. So I think we're going to win. By the way, when we do win, it's going to direct more existing federal infrastructure spending to the middle class and create more jobs than anything that's ever been passed by Congress. I saw that it was reported that under TARP, middle class only got, I think, $2 billion. If the SB has to use the real acquisition budget, which looks like it's $1.2 trillion, that's $271 billion a year, every year in perpetuity, as opposed to $2 billion for TARP. That's over 100 times larger than TARP. And, so I think it's going to be a huge boost to the middle class economy, and I think we're going to win.